Long before modern drugs existed, ancient humans had already discovered ways to alter their own minds. And one of the very first discoveries may have come from something growing right under their feet. What was the first substance humans ever used to feel different? Wild mushrooms grew across ancient forests, and some of them weren't ordinary at all. Early humans, always testing what nature offered, eventually tried them. It probably started as an accident or simple curiosity about what was edible. But some of these mushrooms didn't just feed them, they changed how the world looked and felt. Word would spread fast through a tribe when someone acted strange after eating something new. So, how did this discovery shape early human behavior and beliefs? Long before mushrooms, though, there may have been an even simpler discovery: fruit left out too long. Wild grapes and berries, forgotten in containers, would naturally begin to ferment. That fermentation created something new, a liquid that smelled sharp and tasted strange. Some early humans were cautious, others were curious enough to try it anyway. The first sip probably wasn't pleasant, bitter, sour, and completely unfamiliar. But then something shifted: a warmth, a looseness, a strange kind of comfort. And once one person felt it, everyone around them wanted to feel it too. This accidental discovery may be the true origin of one of humanity's oldest habits. Archaeologists have found ancient pots buried in the ground, containing residue of fermented liquid. Some of these containers are over 9,000 years old, which means humans were experimenting with alcohol far earlier than most people realize. Early celebrations, gatherings, and rituals likely centered around these fermented drinks. But not everyone believed this was purely for enjoyment. The effects were unpredictable. Balance would falter. Speech would slur. Eventually, the body would give in completely, and sleep would take over. And the next day often came with a punishment of its own. Still, ancient humans kept coming back to it, generation after generation. Around the same time, another plant was quietly growing in the fields, one with a much stronger effect. Some early humans discovered that scratching its seed pod released a thick sap. That sap, once dried, held something far more powerful than fermented fruit ever could. When consumed, it brought heavy relaxation and sometimes complete detachment from pain. But it also made people unsteady, disoriented, and difficult to wake. Ancient healers began to wonder if this plant could be controlled, or if it controlled them. In some cultures, these substances weren't just used for pleasure. They became part of sacred rituals. Communities would gather around fires, inhaling smoke from specific plants during ceremonies. Certain herbs were treated as valuable, stored carefully, and used only on important occasions. Tribal leaders and spiritual figures were often the ones who guided these rituals. Entire groups would participate together, believing the experience connected them to something greater. Some described seeing the sky differently, brighter, moving, alive in a way it never had before. Others described colors and shapes that didn't seem to belong to the real world at all. This is likely where some of humanity's earliest cave paintings came from. Spirals, strange patterns, and abstract shapes appear across ancient cave walls worldwide. Researchers have long debated whether these images came from real visions, altered by plants. In several dig sites, archaeologists uncovered small carved objects with an unusual purpose. Tiny pipes carved from stone small enough to fit in one hand. When examined closely, some of these pipes still held traces of burned plant residue. This wasn't guesswork. It was physical evidence, preserved for thousands of years. And these discoveries weren't limited to one location. They appeared across completely different continents. Ancient plant use for altered states has been found in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. Different regions, different plants, but the same basic idea, again and again. It seems like the desire to feel something different may be older than civilization itself. But not every plant they found was safe to experiment with. Some grew tall with drooping leaves blending in among ordinary grass. When someone pulled it up out of curiosity, they had no idea what they'd just found. The effects hit differently this time. Not relaxing, but disorienting. Almost paralyzing. Friends would try to snap them out of it, but they wouldn't respond. This wasn't the same as mushrooms or fermented fruit. This felt dangerous. In some cases, people who tried these plants never woke up again. It became one of the earliest lessons ancient humans learned the hard way. Not every plant that changes your mind is one you should trust. So tribes began separating what was safe from what clearly wasn't. They compared plants side by side, learning to recognize the difference by sight and smell. Some plants earned a reputation for healing. Others earned a reputation for killing. This knowledge didn't come from books. It was passed down through direct experience. Certain plants were ground into paste and used specifically for injuries. When applied to a wound, the pain would noticeably fade. People couldn't explain why, they just knew it worked. And once it worked, they remembered it and used it again and again. Slowly, specific people in the tribe became known for this knowledge. These early healers understood which plants helped and in what amount. Others in the tribe would come to them specifically for treatment. Modern researchers have studied preserved plant material found at ancient sites. In several excavations, dried plant fragments were discovered stored deliberately. Chemical analysis confirmed these plants had real, measurable effects on the human body. This wasn't superstition. It was early, informal medicine. And in a world without modern treatment, that knowledge kept people alive. But not every use of these plants was medical. Sometimes they were simply used to get through a hard night. Illness without medicine could be brutal, and pain relief in any form was valuable. Bitter drinks made from tree bark were sometimes used specifically for this. The taste was awful, but people drank it anyway, just for relief. And when it worked, even slightly, it was worth it. But too much of certain plants came with serious risk. Some substances caused confusion so severe, people became unpredictable, even aggressive. In these moments, ancient communities had to be careful around the person affected. Overuse wasn't treated lightly. It was something tribes learned to watch for. Eventually, the effects would fade, and the person would return to normal. Afterward, elders would often discuss what had happened and set limits going forward. Some tribes began restricting certain plants to specific situations only. Rules started forming around what could be used and when. Certain areas were even marked off specifically for ritual plant use only. This separation between everyday life and altered states became intentional. Archaeologists studying these sites found the boundaries were not random. Ancient markings and carved symbols were found specifically near these separated zones. Researchers believe these symbols may have served as early warnings or instructions. This suggests ancient humans understood these substances required structure, not just impulse. Across different regions, this same pattern of controlled ritual use kept appearing. Ancient sites in completely different parts of the world show almost identical behavior: separate zones, specific plants, controlled group settings. It wasn't random experimentation anymore. It had become organized knowledge. And that knowledge would only become more advanced from here. As tribes grew, so did the role these substances played in daily life. Some communities began holding large group ceremonies centered entirely around altered states. A leader would guide the group, chanting as the ritual began. Drumming and rhythm often accompanied these ceremonies, building energy through the night. As the effects took hold, movements became looser, freer, less restrained. What started as ritual quickly became celebration, with the entire group dancing together. Not everyone participated, though. Some chose to simply observe from a distance. Today, researchers studying ancient ceremonial sites have found something remarkable. These stone circles weren't just decorative, they were built with intention and purpose. Soil samples taken from these sites revealed something unexpected: traces of burned organic material preserved for thousands of years underground. When examined in a lab, these traces matched specific plant compounds. This confirmed that these ceremonies were not just social gatherings. They were structured, repeated events built entirely around altering the mind. And this knowledge wasn't just for adults, it was carefully passed down. Children growing up in these communities were naturally curious about certain plants, but elders quickly stepped in when curiosity crossed into danger. Only the safe plants were shown to younger members of the tribe. This careful teaching helped prevent accidental poisoning across generations. It was survival knowledge, treated with the same seriousness as hunting or fire making. These substances also played a surprising role in how different groups interacted. When two rival tribes met near shared land, tension could run high. But sharing a fermented drink together sometimes helped ease that tension. It became an early form of diplomacy, long before written agreements existed. Researchers believe this may be one of humanity's first peacemaking tools. Shared drinking vessels have been found buried specifically at territory boundaries. This suggests these meetings were intentional, not accidental encounters. It reframes something we think of as purely social as strategic. Alcohol wasn't just for celebration. It may have prevented actual conflict. And once tribes realized this, production increased significantly. More containers, more storage, more consistent fermentation processes. This shift changed daily life in ways that went far beyond drinking. People began deliberately setting aside fruit specifically for fermentation. It was no longer accidental. It became a planned, repeated process. Eventually, these drinks became valuable enough to trade for other goods. Food, tools, and materials were exchanged specifically for fermented beverages. This may be one of the earliest examples of a produced good used as currency. Different tribes meeting specifically to trade this one resource. Archaeologists have found evidence of this exact kind of exchange. Trade goods discovered together at neutral meeting points between territories. This tells us something important about early human society. These substances weren't a distraction from survival. They became part of I. But not everyone in the tribe viewed this the same way. Elders especially took on the role of setting boundaries around use. They warned younger members about the dangers of overindulgence. And most of the time, that warning was respected. This balance between enjoyment and control shaped tribal life for generations. Across different cultures, this same pattern repeated again and again. Controlled use, passed down knowledge, respect for the risk involved. It's a pattern that, in many ways, still exists today. As generations passed, this knowledge didn't disappear. It evolved. What started as accidental discovery slowly became refined tradition. Containers became more advanced. Storage became more intentional. Communities developed dedicated processes just for producing these substances. What was once a lucky accident became a reliable, repeatable craft. Trade expanded. What one tribe produced, another tribe wanted. Researchers studying these ancient societies have found something surprising. Buried storage rooms filled with dozens of containers, all in one place. This wasn't personal use anymore. This was large-scale production. Entire parts of ancient communities were dedicated to this single purpose. But alongside production, something else was also growing: spiritual significance. Certain individuals began to specialize, not in medicine, but in guidance. These figures would use specific plants to enter a meditative, altered state. In this state, they believed they could connect with something beyond the physical world. Others in the tribe would come to them seeking wisdom or answers. These figures held a very different kind of respect than a typical healer. Modern archaeologists studying ancient rock art have noticed a pattern. Certain paintings appear specifically near sites linked to ritual plant use. Spiral patterns, floating figures, shapes that don't resemble anything in nature. Some researchers believe these images directly reflect altered perception. This connects ancient art directly to ancient consciousness altering practices. Meanwhile, medicinal use continued to develop alongside spiritual practice. Sick individuals were treated using increasingly specific plant dosages. Healers learned to measure carefully, understanding that more wasn't always better. Patients often showed noticeable improvement, even without modern medicine. This early trial and error process laid the foundation for medical knowledge. Today, scientists studying these same plants have confirmed something incredible. Many contain compounds still used in modern medicine thousands of years later. Ancient humans, without laboratories, discovered what science would later prove. Their methods were primitive. Their conclusions were often remarkably accurate. Over time, this entire chapter of human history became foundational. Modern rituals, modern medicine, and even modern social drinking all trace back to this. What began as one curious bite of a mushroom shaped human culture forever. Today, the substances have changed, but the underlying behavior hasn't. Humans still seek connection, relief, celebration, and altered states of mind. The methods evolved. The instinct never left. Looking back, it's clear this wasn't just about getting high. It was about survival, connection, medicine, spirituality, and community, all at once. Ancient humans didn't fully understand the science behind what they were doing. But through trial, error, and observation, they built real knowledge that lasted generations. And that knowledge quietly shaped the world we live in today. So the next time you see a modern ritual involving one of these substances, remember its roots go back further than almost anything else in human history. Ancient humans were curious, resourceful, and willing to experiment with the unknown. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that still echoes today. If you enjoyed this look into ancient human behavior, you'll want to see what else they discovered by accident. From medicine to ritual to the earliest forms of trade, this is only one part of the story. There's a lot more hidden in the details of how ancient humans really lived. So if this kind of history interests you, make sure you stick around for what we uncover next.